So, as I've been doing this whole YouTube thing for the past couple of years, one of the most important lessons that I have learned over time is to look at the comment sections on my videos. Now, the reason I say this is because the comment section is more useful to a YouTuber like myself than most of you probably realize. For you guys, you probably just see it as a way to comment on a video and interact with others who watched it. But for me, it's not only a way to see what people think about the video, but it's also a way to see who watches the videos, who watches them often, what videos work and what videos don't, if I miss something, and most importantly, recommendations for Skylanders. I know most of you are probably wondering why I started the video off with that whole spiel, and that's because the Skylander that I'm going to talk about today is the only Skylander that I've been prodded about for this long and this many times. I've not only been asked in the comment section of a ton of my videos to cover the Skylander specifically, but people want to see me cover this character so much, to the point that I was even asked about it in a completely unrelated live stream on my Discord, where I was playing Frostpunk. As you can probably tell, this is a Skylander that many of you wanted me to cover, so that's exactly what we're going to do today. We are going to cover the backstory and comic that this Skylander is involved in, but before we get into it, I have something important that I need to inform you all about. The Skylanders Wiki has moved from fandom to its own site, and from what I understand, this is because of fandom's intrusive advertising practices, them having full control over the wiki, and limited options for admins and editors. Fandom has been a pretty annoying website to deal with since I started using it to research these videos, so I'm really happy that there's now a more convenient site to go pillaging lore from. So the link to the new one is in the description of this video. So without further ado, let's get started.
Down for the count.
At this point, the tech element is known for its creative and ingenuitive designs, and when it comes to Jawbreaker, he's no different. Jawbreaker kinda reminds me of robots from the 2000s for some reason, and I think the reason why is because of his bulky design, and the prevalence of his gears on his back. I don't know what it is, but out of most of the Skylanders I've seen, Jawbreaker would probably fit into that setting pretty flawlessly design-wise. Lore-wise, however, he has a pretty interesting backstory, and since he doesn't have a development history to discuss, let's get into his backstory. Interestingly enough, Jawbreaker isn't just your average robot. In actuality, he hails from a race of robots that operate and maintained a vast underground complex of enormous machines. The purpose of these machines were meant to power a vehicle known as the Skytrain, which traveled between thousands of islands on a daily basis. He lived a rather ordered existence like the other robots around him, which was full of rules and regulations, but he didn't really mind that. In fact, he lived his life happily. Well, until a certain event changed things. One day, an army of train enthusiast tech trolls invaded the underground complex with the goal of hijacking the train and using it for their own evil purposes. But before they could get the chance, Jawbreaker jumped into action and used his massive fist to reverse jump the entire army. His quick actions and his ability to think for himself made him an individual, and thus he was made a part of the trap team and given traptanium weapons in the form of two new hands made of pure traptanium. Now, if I have to be honest here, this has to be one of the weirdest backstories I've ever read, right next to food fights because of how vague it is compared to all the other backstories I've covered and the lack of answers to things that should have answers. Or at least that's what I would have said if I didn't know about issue 6 of the Skylanders' first comic run. Now, what I just told you earlier was his bio's retelling of events, but his backstory is actually expanded upon in issue 6 of the Skylanders Annual in a story called Blame It on the Train. So without further ado, let's get going. The book starts out with a celebration at a train station, many of the supporting cast being present along with Jawbreaker, who is the esteemed guest, and is interestingly enough in his legendary form, but I'll get back to that when I'm done. The celebration is being held because the Skytrain had recently added the Cloudbreak Islands to its line, which helped make them more connected to the rest of Skylands, and the conductor explains that once Jawbreaker pounds in the final spike, the train will be ready for its trip. Before this could happen, however, a young Mabu walks up to the conductor and asks him when he's going to be done talking since he wants an autograph, but he didn't want it from him. Instead, he wanted one from Jawbreaker as Herman was his biggest fan. The conductor then goes on to explain Jawbreaker's backstory, story, but unlike the bio, we actually get to learn that the troll who led the attack went by the name of Iron-Nose. It also adds a lot of other details as well, like how Jawbreaker broke away from his programming thanks to one of the trolls calling him a machine, but that's just how I view it. Once Herman gets his autograph, he, along with the other passengers, get on the train and Jawbreaker goes to nail the final Traptanium spike into the rails. But before he could, Iron-Nose and his men would come out of nowhere on flying motorcycles, stealing the spike before hijacking the train and taking off with it. But after Jawbreaker saves the conductor from being run over, he begins to run down the train. Seeing this, Iron-Nose sends some of his men to slow him down, only for Jawbreaker to body them and destroy their vehicles, which prompts Iron-Nose to use some rockets to create some distance before disconnecting the cars, which causes the cabins full of passengers to slide back down the slope and towards the crater made by the missiles. Immediately, Jawbreaker jumps to the rescue, pushing his circus to their absolute limit as he tries to stop it from sliding into the hole. And just as he begins to doubt himself, questioning if Iron-Nose was right and if he really was just a machine, Herman encourages him not to give up, and soon Jawbreaker stops the cars and saves the passengers. Jawbreaker then begins to push the cars back up the mountain before reconnecting them to the train itself, somehow getting on top of the cars before running up and punching the daylights out of Iron-Nose. When Jawbreaker retrieves the spike, we then jump back to the celebration, and instead of nailing the spike himself, Jawbreaker gives the honors to Herman, and with that, all well that ends well. I'm actually really glad that this comic exists because, to be frank, Jawbreaker's backstory kinda sucks without all the context, but it also shows us how strong this robot is because, good god, he not only caught up to a speeding train, but he also did this while pushing its cars, along with a ton of other feats shown off in the comic. Now, the arm strength makes sense to me since he needs that strength to crush the crystals used to run the Skytrain, but why is he this fast as well? I mean, it's probably because he's in his legendary form, but since we're here, let's talk about that. Legendary variants are meant to be statues of Skylanders who won gladiatorial style events against other Skylanders, and that these statues can be summoned by special portal masters and brought to life to fight for them. But as you can clearly see in this comic book and in other ones involving Blades, Trigger Happy, Night Shift, and Bouncer, they're also being treated as super forms that the Skylanders can tap into. So what's exactly going on here? Now, I speculated on this a little bit, but I came down to either two answers. Either this is just a retcon because somebody forgot, and this is probably the likely answer, or the statues also grant the Skylanders extra powers on top of being their own separate entities. However, there's one thing about this that I still wish I knew when it came to Jawbreaker. How did he become a Skylander? It's safe to assume that he was in that complex for most of his life, so I'm curious about what he experienced between the gap of him fending off the facility and him becoming a Skylander. Did he get to experience his newfound freedom a little bit, or was he immediately found and given the offer to become a Skylander? Even though the latter is possible, I have a feeling that the former is what actually happened, since I don't think that the Skylanders, more specifically Eon, would do that to someone who just got control over their life. Another thing I want to know is what exactly is going on with the race thing that was brought up in his original backstory, because it's the phrasing that confuses me. Does it mean that the race was specifically referring to their models, or does it mean that they were an actual race in Skylands? But considering the fact that this panel exists in the comic book where all the robots bug out after the trolls break in, I think it's safe to say that the former is the more likely option since he also broke away from his programming as well. What's weird about this is that in his backstory outside of the comic, it suggests that he was able to think independently, i.e. the line that says that he was fine with his orderly existence and that he was actually happy with it, while the comic makes it look like he was just an automaton before he split from his program. But it's possible that I am interpreting this wrong. Still, this all adds to the big question of how Jawbreaker specifically broke away from his program while the other robots didn't, and I think the simplest answer to this is what was shown in the comic. Out of all the robots, Jawbreaker was the closest to the explosion, and because of this, he was knocked to the floor, or he's the only one we see getting knocked away from the blast. This is just speculation, but what if that explosion damaged his programming somehow? And adding on to the fact that he, along with all the other robots nearby, suffered a malfunction, this could have broken his programming even further, or given him enough strength to break away from it and give him free will. But once again, it's all speculation. But still, this raises the really real and confusing question of what exactly is telling the truth and what is not. And once again, this brings the question of who wrote the Skylanders bios to the forefront. The only person I could really rule out from this with somewhat flimsy evidence is Eon, because, well, he has his own bios for the Skylanders and the annuals, but it's flimsy because he could have easily written the second ones on his own. It could also be Hugo, it could also be Ankh Beekman since he already wrote about the Skylanders in the past, hell, it could even be someone else that we don't know about yet. But I'm pretty sure that this is just one of those unsolved mysteries in the Skylanders universe that we just won't ever figure out unless we ask someone who worked on the games directly. Which is something I know I'm not going to do, I suck at interviews. But with that, this is where our video comes to an end for today. But before I go, I would like to once again inform everyone about the migration of the Skylanders wiki to its own site. I actually used the new one to do research for this video, and it's far better than the old fandom page in my eyes since it doesn't run like molasses. So the link to it is in the description below. So with that, I would like to thank you all for watching. Like always, hit the subscribe button if you enjoy content like this, share this around so I can grow the channel, leave some comments down below to make the algorithm happy, check out Return to Skylands along with the Discord and the music link down in the description below, and I will see you all in the next one.